Flying Joe. Know all there is to know, from masterpieces to deep fried tacos. And if the movie sucks, you might hear them say, there's no telling where the guys will take you. Get ready for a spoiler. Won't say it twice, cause we already warned you. Better watch out, it's gonna ruin the plot. Real spoilers. Real spoilers. Real spoilers.
Broadcasting from the lush but not lavish studios located in the basement of the O'Keefe Institute for Advanced Film Snarkitude, this is Real Spoilers, episode 705, Vengeance.
There it is. That's it. Bingo.
Southern pronunciation.
Yes. Well, it's fitting.
It is. That's true. That's
Yeah.
true.
So before we get too far afield, let's go around the table and everyone can introduce themselves because I'll forget.
This is Joe.
This is Kevin.
And this is Tom. Kevin's technically a guest this week.
That's true.
Because Joe and I are in real life, and Kevin is off in COVID corner.
I would say the vid has finally taken all three members of us down.
No.
Oh,
Tom
two of
hasn't?
us.
So far,
Oh, knock on wood.
I have not gotten the Rona.
There we go.
So,
Very good.
Fingers crossed.
Everybody else in your house did.
It's a testament to tonal.
That's right.
Yeah. Actually, my stepdaughter hasn't gotten it.
Oh, really?
Yeah. So
Okay,
half
okay.
the house has gotten it.
That's
but
crazy. That's so
yeah,
weird.
my wife and son have gotten it, but not my stepdaughter.
There we
So
go.
I don't know what that means. Like, So, and because it's not like I haven't been going places.
Sure.
I've gone on 2 cruises. I've gone to Disney World. I've licked 47 doorknobs
At Disney World.
at Disney World. I just flat out French kissed an ICU nurse.
Bold move.
Yeah, I'm
Bold
just
move.
I'm like, let's get this over with.
Can I get this, please?
Yeah, and also I'm the COVID medical trial that I'm in. I have my last appointment next week, so I've made it through the entirety of the COVID Moderna medical trial,
Right.
without getting COVID.
Good job.
There you
Knock
go.
wood.
Good job.
So
You get a prize at the end?
you get not COVID.
That's fair. I mean, well, that counts.
Yes, that counts. Absolutely, that counts. So, and obviously, we should just say the vaccine reduces your likelihood of getting it.
Yes.
Does not guarantee you won't get it, but it reduces the severity in the event that you do.
Correct.
So that's how vaccines operate.
Right.
They're not magic cloaks of protection like you're playing Dungeons and Dragons. So
Yeah, I mean, but look at it this way. I tested less than a week ago now. I tested positive and basically had sore throat, little headache, minor cough, but I've had worse colds and I'm vaccinated and boosted. So,
Right.
if I hadn't been, who knows?
yeah.
I'm almost on the mend here.
Yeah.
Woo-hoo.
And reduces the likelihood that you'll give it to someone else.
There it is.
So
Exactly.
Shameless plugs. Don't forget, we're available on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Google Podcasts. Wherever you find a podcast, you can find us. While you're there, be sure and follow us so you never miss an episode. Maybe leave us a review so people that come along after you know that we're worth checking out. You can also find us on Facebook, facebook.com/Real Spoilers. While you're there, like the page, join the group. And people who were kind enough to share an episode this last week. So if you share an episode and we can see it based on your privacy settings, we'll read your name on the show. Here are people who shared it last week. Christopher Rex, Librarian Cynthia, Ralph Tribble, Heather Sachs, who expected us to be cranky about last week, or at least one of us to be cranky about last week's episode, but our movie.
Oh, no.
But no, I think we all dug it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
I'm not sure what we were supposed to be cranky about. Maybe just we don't like the kids these days. It was probably me. It was probably me.
Yeah.
If you think someone's going to be cranky on the show,
right,
it's
right,
probably
right.
me.
Let's
Yeah.
not kid ourselves. She said at least one of them is going to be cranky. Yeah,
It's
we
the
knew
old
what
guy. Like, we've all been vaxxed and boosted, but only one of us is old enough to get, like, triple boosted.
That's true.
And then Gabriel Lugo, Julianne Jordan, Brendan McGuckin, Travis Tewitt, Tammy Lynn Powers Betts, Gris Falls, Glenn Cougar Mellenbrewer. Elle is not well, which every week I'm like, I hope that changes to Elle
I know,
is
yeah,
well.
Elle
I'm
is well.
worried about her.
Yeah.
Invasion of the Remake, Ronnie Castle, Mike and Oscar, Spoiler Piece Theater, Matt Naglia, Cinema Recall, Nostalgia Cast, Geek to Me Radio, In Session Film, Binge Movies, Ryan Terry from the Forza Crowd podcast, Piecing It Together podcast, Feelin' Film, Colby Mack, and Batman Rye Guy. So thank you so much for sharing the episode. We greatly appreciate it. And finally, don't forget, we have a Patreon where for $5 a month, you get all sorts of bonus content, and you help support the show, and we like you extra.
Yeah, and there's a bunch of Evil Dead stuff up there, and I think Army of Darkness is on the way.
Awesome. So there's all that. Let's dig into Vengeance.
This is an interesting flick.
I love this movie.
Yeah.
I actually watched it a second time.
Okay.
Because
nice.
It had been about a month since I had seen it. So when it hit VOD, I had some Vudu credit. And I was like, screw it. So I went ahead and just bought it. Because it was, $20 and $5 more you own it.
Yeah.
And I knew I liked it.
I mean, you skip a trip to the theater. If you have at least 2 people in your household, let's say, buying it is like 2 tickets. And if you can pay $5 more than renting it, it's like, why not? I mean, I'll usually roll the dice on a purchase for a, theater at home.
Right, for sure. And so we had 3 people watch it because my wife hadn't seen it. And then my son was like, sure, I'll watch it. And
it's got Ryan from The Office.
Yeah, and he hasn't really watched The Office all that much, but but he loved it because we fully expected him to bail. We were like, just try it, and if you don't like it, you can leave. And he was like, okay, and he got totally sucked in.
It's a smart detective story, kinda.
Yeah,
like it
is.
Yeah, it's. I just think it's also an interesting commentary on.
It has a lot to say.
It does,
and
yes,
and for you would it just lands in an interesting place because it's very much about the divide in the country, politically, but it never actually is overtly political in terms of like they never talk about. It's more like culturally political than
way of life.
Yeah, than it is like this politician versus this.
Right,
politician.
you've got a New York native and a Texas native,
right,
and that's
And I think it's fair. They're very fair to both sides because they don't present, even though your main character's from New York, and of course you're going to be presented as the more liberal type of ideas and concepts, but the lessons learned throughout the film when he goes to Texas and you start seeing people that he never thought he would relate to, I think it's really fair and interesting how he starts to assimilate into that lifestyle in this short amount of time. So I just think that it was fair the way that...
Totally. It's very nuanced because there are obviously certain aspects about him that you like a lot. There are also aspects about him that are very douchey. And then when you deal with a lot of the Texan characters, like same thing, right? Like it's like there are aspects about them that are very endearing and there are aspects about them that are very douchey.
Right.
And just but in polar opposite directions. And so
and I think that the main takeaway that I got from it is it really paints a picture of we're all just human beings.
Yeah.
Even though we may disagree on things, whether it's political or way of life and these things that we do very different, when you start to talk to people who you maybe normally wouldn't affiliate with because you don't think you have the same interests or whatever, but you start to talk to them and you find out like, hey, maybe we're not so different after all.
Yeah, for sure. And like I said, I positively love this movie.
Yeah,
it's one of my favorite movies of the year so far.
It's interesting to see it come from Blumhouse.
Yeah.
Which is very interesting.
It's weird. Voodoo has it listed as horror. And I was like,
well, that's...
there is nothing. Somebody just got lazy and saw Blumhouse.
That's exactly
There
it.
is nothing about this movie that is horror.
It's an interesting step for Blumhouse because they are the horror, they are the horror company.
Yeah.
And I just wonder if this is them being like, well, if A24 can do horror or what have you, maybe we can dip our toes into this drama game.
Well, no, they've done it before though. Was Blumhouse the one that did Whiplash? They've done other things that aren't horror before.
Oh, I think they did. Did they do Whiplash?
It's one of them like that to where I was surprised.
Okay. Or Ghost House. No, I don't know if that's true or not. I don't think Ghost House did Whiplash. But yeah, it's an interesting, I think Blumhouse's money makers, when you watch their opening credit or their opening like logo thing now is all horror stuff, right? Like it's Michael Myers and it's not Jigsaw, but everything from like the Conjuring universe, all that stuff. So it's interesting to see him take another leap into this drama world because Whiplash, was ridiculous, right? Like it critically and
they were for sure Whiplash. They were also, according to this article, Black Klansmen.
Oh, interesting.
There you go.
Yeah.
So that is interesting. Jason Blum kind of gets a bad rap as like he'll just make whatever cheap horror movie he can. But I mean, those are those three titles. This one, Black Klansman, and Whiplash, are some pretty.
There's a couple other movies that I'm not familiar with: Griffin and Phoenix,
Oh.
Accidental Husband, and The Normal Heart.
Okay. What and does it say what years those came out by chance?
Normal Heart is 2014, Accidental Husband is 2008, and Griffin and Phoenix is 2006.
So that's, I think, him trying to figure it out.
Yeah.
I think at that point. But
And
yeah,
I mean, he produced a Benji movie on Netflix too, so
Well.
they've got their hands in all sorts of pies.
Yeah, but Benji was disemboweled at the end.
oh, that's
no, in
true.
the beginning, and then he comes back.
Surprise
Yeah, right,
horror
right.
film
Yeah.
version, right?
Yes.
And I think the other thing that people tend to forget is that BJ Novak was a writer on The Office.
Yeah, he started as a writer, and then they needed people in the background.
Right.
And I mean, I think he was always a little bit more than a background guy, but some of those people, like Phyllis, were never really intended to talk. They were just supposed to be extras with, maybe a stray line of dialogue.
Sure.
And then over time, they're just like running out of story ideas, so they just,
I was gonna say, there's only so much you can do without pulling in new people for stories.
Yeah, I mean, like on MASH with Nurse Kelly, right? Like
Right.
she was just this background person who they kept bringing back because they wanted you to see the same people in the background every week.
Oh, that makes sense.
Because of course there would be the same people.
You can't
every
have
week.
like a rotating office staff.
And then eventually she started getting lines, and then I mean, she was never a huge character, but she does, I will say, have like maybe my favorite episode of MASH
Oh,
is
really?
where they focus on she tees into Hawkeye. This is like, I think in the last season, where she's like, "You've nailed every nurse in this place but me. Like what's
what's wrong with me?
What's the deal? Like you won't hit on me, you won't flirt with me, nothing." And it's like, it's a great episode.
That's cool.
It's a great,
Okay.
great
That's
episode.
good
And
stuff.
especially because it also kind of like puts Hawkeye through a little bit more of a modern lens of like, you're kind of a
Right.
like as
Right,
much as
right,
I
right.
love Hawkeye, he's kind of a
Yes.
sometimes. But anyway,
Do you guys remember when he popped up in Inglorious Bastards?
Who
BJ
did?
Novak.
Yeah.
Oh yeah. As one of Brad Pitt's like group of dudes.
That was the first time I saw him outside of The Office, and it just seemed so odd because, from office worker Ryan
Right.
to Nazi killing.
Yeah.
But, he seems like, especially after seeing this film, I mean, obviously he's a talented writer, but you don't see him acting in as much stuff, and I think this really proves that he can do it, and I'm hoping he starts to pop up in more stuff after this gets seen.
Yeah, he's really good in this. I mean, I don't think he'll ever be the kind of actor that can get lost in a role.
Right.
Like, you're never going to walk out of a movie going like, wait,
This does kind of feel
that
like
was BJ
Ryan.
Novak?
Right.
Like, this definitely feels like a variation on Ryan in The Office,
Yeah.
but not to be but not in a
No.
lazy way.
No,
it's
not
just
at all.
like it really is more of like it feels in a lot of ways like he took that character, put him in a different setting but made him less of a cartoon.
Yes.
Especially by the end of that series, Ryan very much became a cartoon character.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And
He was in Saving Mr. Banks too. He was one of the Sherman brothers. I thought he did a good job, even though that wasn't a very Ryan-ish role, but he's had a few where he's proven that he can do it.
Yeah.
yeah, it's just interesting when you see these guys and you're just like, well, it's kind of incredible that he wrote this entire movie. It's like, well, he was writing on one of the most popular sitcoms, of the last 20 years. And it's a story that I think is super interesting because
Podcasting, yeah.
well, podcasting, but also like the sensationalism of a story and not realizing that. I think, did we talk about this where like people started doing like these true crime documentaries where all of a sudden the documentary comes out, but then there's other people who are just like, this was my life,
Right.
Like I think it's the Pam Hupp, but like her daughter, I think maybe was just like, none of this is legit. You know what I mean? Like,
Yeah.
she's like, I lived through this.
Right.
So it's an interesting story so the premise of this is basically BJ Novak is a writer in New York and he wants to do this podcast, but has no real
Podcasting background.
story.
I love the idea too of like, he's successful. He writes for the New Yorker.
Yeah.
But in his mind, like, podcasting,
That's where it is.
where you become famous.
Right.
And so it's
oh,
just a weird,
let me tell you.
yeah. And so he, which I mean, but in that world it is, right?
No, sure.
Like,
Yes, American Life
and
or,
he's surrounded by all
Serial.
these people who have podcasts, and so he's trying to pitch his podcast to basically a fictionalized version of NPR.
I was like, John Mayer wasn't playing himself, right?
A character named John.
Just a
but
character named
no.
John.
Oh,
So-
then it was definitely playing himself.
Yeah.
Okay,
I
perfect.
don't. Yeah, I mean, it's not. He's not listed as John Mayer, so I don't think you're supposed to think he's the
go-
musician.
But I mean,
You can go
when,
either way with it.
when John Mayer
Yeah.
is playing a character named John,
Yeah,
that's kind of on the nose.
100%.
Yeah, right. And he is like their conversation is it's kind of like bodies, where it's like it's very vapid,
Right.
You know, like they're not really saying anything to each other. But
What I love about this opening scene, where I guess it's not technically the opening scene. The opening scene is the girl dying, but
yeah, right.
The kind of that's more of a prelude. But
Yeah.
this opening scene,
I don't even remember that. What's the opening scene?
where she's you see her
she's
crawling
crawling.
through the oil fields where she's gonna die, where they're gonna find her
I
body.
completely forgot.
Yeah.
That. Okay.
Because that opening scene is what you think of as the opening scene is so good,
Right,
yeah.
Right. Where
Oh, yeah.
they're sitting there going through their phones, figuring out like these girls that they have them all
No
their-
last names.
no last names,
Yeah.
and they just have like little like hints to remind them who they are.
Right.
And that conversation about commitment, about how
Yeah.
they don't want to meet the parents. Like, why would I want to meet your parents? Then
I don't
and
need to
by
know how
the
many siblings you have.
I don't even know.
and
Yeah,
by-
like
Yeah, and by the time I do, I'm done. Like, I don't
Right.
want to be in that relationship. I mean,
Oh,
it's obvious.
I only date only children or oldest of 3. But what I love about that conversation is the way it's written is they're so vapid.
Yeah.
But they so don't think that they're like they
Right.
think that they're really deep the way that they're viewing the world. and they're
Exactly.
Just
Oh, yeah.
But it's also
assholes.
I also think it's an interesting take, which has been a new thing of like hookup culture. Like that's kind of been a thing recently where it's like there is no, from what I interpret, there is no like dating anymore. It's
Yeah.
just like you see a person on an app, you swipe left or right. and
Well,
then-
like the options are infinite, right?
Right, yeah,
Like
that's exactly
you
it.
know, and if somebody brings you a box of infinite chocolates, a Whitman sampler of infinite chocolates, you're not just going to land on nougat. Like
Right.
you're going to keep sampling.
But it is like, and when we get as the movie progresses, we find out that that I keep wanting to call him BJ Novak's character
Ben.
He he hooks up with this gal. He gets a phone call from an unknown number, and they basically say that this girl has died, and you need to come to Texas. And he was like,
the most unrealistic thing in this entire
"It is."
movie.
I agree.
is
Sort of though.
He would have never answered an unknown number.
Oh, sure. Yes, that's exactly it. Yeah.
Can I say I could not get this out of my head, and I'm thinking maybe Tom is going to understand this, but this movie kept reminding me of Dear Evan Hansen.
You're definitely not going to get me on that one.
No. I get it because they're both entering these worlds under false pretense.
The
And-
premise
Oh, wait,
is
I did see that
very
movie, didn't I?
similar
Yeah.
as
Yeah, I did. Okay.
crazy.
Forgot that I
Yeah.
saw that.
The premise is, even though the movies overall are vastly different,
Right.
but in Dear Evan Hansen, Evan is pretending to be this guy's best friend,
Right,
like
right,
Tom
right.
said, under false pretenses, and gets to know the family and gets to know the sister, which
Yeah.
in this movie he gets to know the brother. And then as they start as he's talking about this podcast and the things go along and they say, oh, people are going to start thinking about things a different way and people are trying to find justice for her or whatever. And I was thinking of the Connor Murphy project and Dear
Yeah.
Evan Hansen. Like, there were just things where I'm like, maybe he didn't mean to. Maybe he saw it and just never thought about it again. So I'm not saying he copied it, but I just wonder if there's something in his consciousness where the idea slipped in there, because it's such a similar like start to the premise.
Yeah, it's
don't
almost like they both created works of art based on the same writing prompt,
Oh, sure.
and then just spun off in wildly different directions. Yeah,
kinda
Exactly.
interesting.
So anyway, I don't know. It just I was at a movie and I was on my phone, but I heard the start of the trailer a couple months ago or whatever, and I'm like, wait, what? What is that? What happened? He's pretending to be the boyfriend, or I don't know. So it just
no, I didn't make that connection, but I think it's fair.
Yeah.
But in no way is it a retread. But like, yeah, they
Yeah.
definitely kind of start in a
Well,
similar
it's kind of like
place.
the is it death in the family? Like, does that kind of have a similar premise, or is that just
where Robin dies.
like as opposed to Death of the Family.
is that what it is? No, it's death of the family, right?
Well, there's two of them.
Well, I
Because
don't really
they do
count
it
the s- I
twice.
don't count the second one. That doesn't count. There's really
I liked
one.
both of them.
All right.
I like the Snyder. Is that Snyder? the-
It is Snyder and Capullo.
Yeah,
but
thought
I
that was
mean, come
good.
on, you're not going to top Marv Wolfman and Jim Aparo blowing up Robin.
I'm just saying.
Well, and then they
Did they have a 1-900 number that you could call?
yeah,
If they didn't, then they lose.
it's a Twitter poll.
Yeah, but like
Not the same.
it is interesting because the beginning of this movie does hit on hookup culture and all that stuff. And then as we find out that BJ Novak, that Ben hooked up with this girl,
right, Abby,
and as he gets to know her post-mortem, he starts to be like, oh, this gal was pretty incredible.
She was pretty great. So
it is like, I think that is kind of a commentary on that. Just take your time and get to know somebody, and they may turn out to be someone pretty spectacular. And I was like,
the bait and switch of, oh, she talked about you all the time and told her family. I mean, if we're going to spoil it up front, this is a great movie to watch, but the family, the brother keeps saying like, oh my gosh, she talked about you all the time. And then of course he does the play along thing like, oh yeah, like he tries to play along with her or whatever. And in the end, the reveal of it, that it wasn't even him.
Right.
She was talking about,
which I think is
so
even
genius.
better. Yeah. It's a pretty great reveal. And it's, you know that it's something, right? But they do a really good job of keeping everything under wraps because I feel like he's not. So what happens? He goes to Texas, and because I don't know, because he has no idea about the podcast yet.
Like, right, he wants to start a podcast,
but he doesn't know how to do it.
He hasn't. This is, I think, what stops Ben from being a complete in the eyes of the audience. Like this is like there's a lot of little subtle choices in this movie that keeps you rooting for the right people or not rooting against the right people.
Yeah.
Right. And that he gets guilted to go to this funeral, but he does not go to this funeral to start a podcast.
Correct.
Right. He gets guilted to go to this funeral for this girl that he barely knows.
Right.
And that
he could have just hung up the phone.
I mean, he could have,
like if he was a real jerk.
Right.
Oh yeah.
And
sure.
he goes, and then after the funeral, you get the great scene where they make him speak at the funeral about this girl that he doesn't know.
Oh my God, that was so good.
And he's
trying to come up with something that she loved. Music.
Yeah, there's a picture of her playing a guitar. She loves music. I know that. I know that.
Oh my God.
It was so awkward. And so it was pretty great.
The writing is so funny in this movie.
She will be a song in our heart. But it's not until after that when then they're driving down the empty highway in Texas, and her brother is like, we need to avenge her death.
And he was
and that's when he figures out, hey, I want to start a podcast. People love dead white girls like this.
That's a pretty great line. Where I wish I could remember the woman's name because she was in.
It's Issa Rae.
Is that what it is?
The producer?
Podcast
producer? Yeah.
She's like, everybody loves a
dead white
girl. And that becomes
the holy grail of podcasts.
It is, that becomes the name of the podcast.
The working title.
The working title.
Yeah,
they end up calling it Abilene, but
the working title
is Dead White Girl. Yeah. But so he doesn't go down the podcast. He doesn't go there with malice in his heart. He gets guilted into going there.
Right.
But he does go, and then he decides when the brother's like, you got to help me. And the brother's convinced that there's this grand conspiracy, right? Because, conservative people in small towns love their conspiracies. And so he thinks he's an idiot, but he's like, hey, I can turn this into content and make you feel better about your situation.
We can work this case and we'll figure it out.
Right.
We'll see what's what. And it's just interesting.
Did you recognize the brother, Joe?
Of course, he's the Corinthian.
Yeah, I mean, it's a good week for Boyd Holbrook.
Yeah, that's true.
He's the Corinthian, and Netflix is the Sandman. So I had been watching that, and I watched this movie. I'm like, oh, holy crap!
I gotta tell you, that show is phenomenal.
I've just seen the first two, but
it is pretty great.
So
faithful.
Good.
That's the crazy part.
Yeah,
it's almost exactly line for line a faithful adaptation of the comics. It's crazy.
It is interesting how they can't use or didn't use any DC references.
Oh yeah, they can.
But
it's
a Warner Brothers
Constantine.
Okay, but she's John
in the book, right?
No. I mean, like when you look at her on the show, and she starts talking, and she talks about things that happened in her past, and like she's at the Casanova Club, and there's the mucous membrane poster. She's John,
right?
And it's just like they just changed her, but they took out Etrigan, they took out Arkham Asylum, and who John D is. They took all of that out.
Right.
And I was like, that's where the Ruby is. They took that out. And I just think it's interesting that it's a WB produced show, but they're just take all of the DC stuff out. Like all of the DC proper stuff out.
They just don't have they'd have to pay different people and everything, like to license those characters.
It might already be farmed out to other people.
That could be.
And I think also, I think it just adds a layer of confusion that the show doesn't
That's
need.
true. You drop in Etrigan the Demon, you're
Because
like, wait a minute,
the thing is, if you'll remember, when Sandman came out the comic book, they forced that on him. Like, he didn't want...
Neil Gaiman?
Yeah, he didn't want to include all these other DC characters, and they made him do that because... They created Vertigo because of the success of Sandman. If you look at those first 6-7 issues, there's no Vertigo logo on them because it doesn't exist yet.
Interesting.
Yeah, and so, and they were, because he have a meeting where he meets the original Sandman.
He makes a comment where he's like, they put people in my place.
Yeah, and there's a crossover with Justice League or something.
Yeah, when he tries to find his Ruby.
Yeah, it's been a long time since I've actually read it, but they pushed that on him. They were like, no, this still needs to live in the world of DC. And then once it became this huge giant hit and was bringing in all these other types of readers that comic books weren't getting at the time, they were like, we'll create a new imprint. You'll be the flagship title. And basically, you don't got to do that.
Don't worry about it.
And then it never happened again.
You can interact with Swamp Thing and Constantine, because that's how they say it, and I was right.
But once you get past Preludes and Nocturnes, it doesn't really connect back to the DC universe at all.
It is interesting how it's front loaded, very much just name dropping DC stuff left and right.
Yeah.
There's always a DC character,
and then it just stops.
It just as you get further away, But I could not believe it how close. And Joe, you said you were reading.
I'm reading
and
along.
watching.
I'm in issue 5, so I'm at the diner issue.
Okay,
and we haven't watched that episode yet. And I was like, man, I don't know how they're gonna do this, but this is gonna be messed up.
Yeah,
that's all I got to say.
I was talking to a guy at work who always asks me if I've seen this, if I've seen that, and I was like, I haven't seen it yet. I was like, I'm on the fence of if it's worth checking out. I was just like, in my litmus test for if I should watch. I'm like, is there a diner episode? And he's like, I haven't gotten that far. And I'm like, so I don't know. And I'm like, okay. And he comes in the next day and he's like, there's a diner episode. I'm like, then I'll watch it. I was like, then they must be doing it right.
Yeah.
It is almost, I mean, I know you,
it's almost,
how many episodes are you in, Tom?
Just 2. I've just seen the
first two. Okay.
Yeah.
It's but I mean it's extremely faithful. And they change little things, and of course the DC stuff, but it's amazing how close the script is to the pages. And
from what I remember, even visually, they treated it looked like they treated the comic book like a storyboard.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
The guy doesn't look. Morpheus has this is such a weird tangent we just went on, but Morpheus has a very different look than this guy does.
It's hard to get somebody to look like that in real life.
I
also felt
Rickman
like they always played games with Morpheus's height.
Yep.
Like sometimes he was taller and thinner, and sometimes that's just artist interpretation. But just in the same way, sometimes Batman's got pointy ears, but
or bigger ears.
But he changes based on who sees him,
right?
The different cultures, and so I mean, it makes sense too,
for sure. But it's
that Johanna Constantine episode, Leanne's like, you are loving I'm like, this is the Constantine I've always wanted. This is okay. So he goes to, and then he realizes, okay, we've got something. We've got a podcast here. We've got content. And I do also feel like what he could have done is turn that podcast kind of into a New York natives commentary on these moronic Texans.
Which is what he was going
to do.
I think it's where he starts.
I think you're right. And then he has that talks to the grandma, and I feel like that's the switch where she kind of said, start talking about the love of Texas and the Alamo and how people.
Who are you going to see at South by? You go to South by, you're going to see a band.
And so I just thought that was really interesting that he was like, okay,
I love those moments where he thinks they don't know anything.
They're a bunch of morons.
When he's like, they asked him if he's ever been to Texas, and he says, I've been to South by.
Right.
And then he starts to explain it, and she's like, yeah, we know what South by Southwest is. We're not dumb.
Which I think is really cool.
Oh my God. And Abilene, she wouldn't even touch an Advil, and every single person has the same story. And oh my God, that reveal with the grandma.
Yeah. Well, it's also, I found that interesting because it is a really well done detective story.
It is. It works on that level too.
And usually when you hear multiple people say the same thing, you're like, well, then that's not true. You know, like when multiple people have the exact
word for word,
right? You're like,
story,
well,
yeah.
okay, now we're hiding something because you've rehearsed this story.
But this movie, because it works as a comedy, you take
just-
those
it's a
lines
joke,
with a grain
right.
of salt.
Yeah.
So the fact that everyone says the same thing about her, that's a comedic way of writing. And like, well, yeah, she was that pure. Everyone says the exact same thing about her. So it's really smart the way that they flip it on you. And there's several reveals in this film that I didn't think were going to be reveals. Like, I took it for just being comedy.
Right.
And I think that it helps this movie because, especially if you go in not expecting it to be this good or this clever, the way that it pays off, it's really, really smart.
Yeah,
For sure.
It is very, very well done. So they start like working the case, kind of. Ben goes to the cops, and he just gets the runaround.
And I love the fact that like this is small town conservative America,
Right.
and like they don't like the cops either.
No, they don't.
And
Right.
It's so funny how like they'd be the first people to stick up for the cops, but they're also like, but they're idiots,
Right.
And
We don't call 911 down here.
yeah, we don't call 911 down here. It's like
Everything is an accident.
Yeah, and he's like, well, what if you're like not in a fire? Well, okay, like ambulance fire, yes, but you know,
Other than that, no.
his line is so great where he's like, you think police are like McDonald's?
Oh,
Justice is an egg McMuffin.
Tom, I wrote that down because it was such a perfect line.
Yeah, he's like, we don't all get the same.
It was. Yeah. What do you
Same
think?
justice.
The cops are like McDonald's and Justice is an egg McMuffin.
Yeah.
Oh, what a
He's
great
like, it's not
line.
the same everywhere. He's like, we don't have the police. We've got Mike and Dan.
Mike and Dan.
Yeah.
Yeah. So
We
well, I
should
guess-
say real quick, just because I want to set this up in the beginning for people that may not have seen this film. So that scene in the beginning sets up who Ben as a character is, and one night stands. Women are in his phone as states or cities. He's just got them labeled to remember.
like
There's
Beth,
a great-
Beth Bumble.
There's a great
Yeah.
joke where they're going through their phones at the beginning, like random house party, and they're like, "Does that mean like you were at a random house party or a random house party?" And he's like,
yeah, they've
"Guess
got
we'll find
all
out."
these ways to identify women, but not by their name. It's by what they look like, where they're from,
Right,
where
right.
the hookup was. Bumble, like you said, what app they use. So they've got all these hookups. And then when the brother calls, we find out that Abilene was just another one of these hookups, and she's in his phone as Texas.
Yeah,
And
at
so
the,
he doesn't.
at the funeral, they're like, "It's so cute. He has me." She said, the mom saying like the daughter was telling her, "It's so cute. He has me saved in his phone as Texas." Like,
yeah, like they take it as something sweet,
endearing
and of course,
nickname. Yeah.
yeah, to
He's just
him
trying to
it's just
remember
a
which one
total
it is.
hookup. He does, it doesn't even know who. Like when the brother calls and says, "Your girlfriend, she's dead," he's like, my girlfriend. And he's trying to figure it out. It's a really funny back and forth between him when he tries to guilt him into it. But that's who Abilene is to Ben at first. She's a name. She's a hookup. She's just Texas. And when we get down there and he starts talking to the family, like you said, in that scene with the grandma and they're having dinner, he starts to pick up on these people and. He refers to them, if you remember in the beginning, as characters when he wants to start the podcast.
Yeah. Which I thought was like a very interesting take on like they're not real people.
Right.
These are just
That's the
characters in my podcast.
Which goes to what you were saying, Joe, and about other real life podcasts and movies and true crime stuff. It's like you have to remember these are real people. We
Right.
watch this stuff and it gets sensationalized and there's stories. And I think that's really smart the way in the beginning he writes for the character to refer to them as, oh, these are all characters for my podcast. But you take a step back and it's like, no, these are real people with real lives going through stuff who've lost people. And that's the discovery that Ben goes on. And so he has such a character arc from the beginning. And I think it's great the way that he sets them up as these just random hookup, bros, whatever, not really caring about people as human beings, just hookups. And then as you start to learn their family and learn people with a different way of life, you see his character grow. And he honestly does start to learn a lot throughout the film. And I love seeing that. And I think he does a good job performing too, right?
Yeah.
You see
yeah.
BJ Novak as an actor, he really portrays that like, oh, maybe I had it wrong. And you see that revelation throughout the film.
Well, it's also they do in Halloween 2018, they do kind of the same thing, right? So you've got the two podcasters that go and see Jamie Lee Curtis, and they're just like, well, what do you think? Like, what, he's going to get out. We're going to try to do this. We're going to try to get him out. And he's not bad. He hasn't done anything in forever. And she's just like, he murdered my friends.
Right. Yeah.
And he tried to murder me.
This occurred.
This happened.
Yeah.
Like, this is real. So I do appreciate that, like, both of those movies kind of do And I think true crime podcasts they can be okay. And I think,
look, I've listened to some true crime podcasts that are great.
Yeah.
But there's a lot of true crime podcasts out there that are kind of icky.
I agree.
And
I agree.
And it's like when we watch Dateline, my wife and I, we watch Dateline all the time. And like there are times when we're like, is it kind of weird? Because it's like we watch these because they're interesting stories. But This really happened. Someone had to die
to get this story
for us to watch this story. Like,
sure.
It's like, are we somehow complicit? And like when there's a rerun of Dateline, like you're like, oh man, and I'm like, oh, did they run out of dead people for you? Is that the problem? Are you
I've
upset?
seen this one.
Yeah, are you upset that they aren't killing people quickly enough to keep the Dateline pipeline feeding your gullet?
I think it's funny, but it's true, right?
Yeah.
And that's what this movie does. Is it's a movie that makes you think of a lot of different things, but that's one of them. Is that these are real people. When you're listening to the podcast, watching the show, I just tried a trial of Discovery Plus to see what the hell what their content is, and it's mostly reality shows. There's all this true crime stuff and stuff that I had never heard about, and it just shows me they're churning out shows based on the popularity of true crime.
Yeah.
But it's like, man, those are all stories that happen to real people, and it's something to keep in mind.
Yeah, I think it all kicked off with My Favorite Murderer. I feel like that's kind of the big one.
Serial.
That's
Serial
true.
really
Yeah,
elevated that, and podcasts in general. But
sure.
But, yeah, I know. Like back to Dateline, like sometimes we'll do an episode where it's like it's a story that a true crime podcast had seized upon
broke or something.
Yeah, and so they're interviewing the guy who has the podcast, and it's like,
oh boy,
and he's like, look, we have podcasts, right?
We do.
So we're not above it. And if someone came to us and said, do you want to be on our show? We would be very excited.
We do it all the time.
But there's not a dead person attached to our appearance
That's
on that
true.
show.
It's a different.
And so like sometimes you can
yeah.
see this guy is just like wired for sound. He's so excited, and I'm just like, there's a dead person. I was going to say girl because it's almost always a girl.
Right.
But I'm just like, yeah, it's your enthusiasm here is a little bit squicky.
Yeah. And that it's not the most. It's a pretty toxic. It can be a pretty toxic environment in those things. But in this flick, Ben kind of turns that on its head, where he does get involved with the family,
right.
and he's not. He was going to call them characters, but as he spends time with them, he's like, okay, these are real people suffering from a real loss, and like let's figure this out. Let's see if we maybe she was murdered, and we will figure this out.
He's got the great line where he like his moment of like, I will avenge her. He's like, my talent is researching and finding ways to take disparate thematic concepts and tie them together.
I can get people to talk,
and I will find the person or general societal force and define it. I will define it.
That was my favorite line in the entire movie. I stopped the movie and messaged Tom and quoted that end part of that because it was so freaking funny. The way that they kept talking about vengeance and he kept going back to his talents, and it was hilarious the way that he defined them.
So he goes to, I guess he realizes that he goes through his phone and he sees that she had texted him a bunch of times. Like, and it wasn't like, hey, you up, all that stuff. She was like trying to engage him in conversation.
Yeah.
She sent him like a link to her songs that he never listened to.
Right.
And then he clicks the link and of course it's gone.
It's dead now.
It's dead. No pun intended.
Yeah.
But then he figures out where she recorded it, and I do love the line where she's like, blah blah blah, recording studio, making dreams come true since 2018, and I was like, right on. And we get Ashton Kutcher, and
who is great.
He is great, and it's interesting because to me, obviously, he was Kelso, and he played into that for as long as he could.
Yeah,
Dude, Where's My Car? Just all of those kind of like
doofy,
punked, like all that stuff, and.
Which is so, knowing that about him makes him even better for this role. Because, the whole premise of the movie is how you see people isn't how they are. And Ashton Kutcher is like next level genius. Like,
in real life.
In real life.
Yeah.
Like
right.
That dude is crazy smart. And
that's why when he invests in stuff, like
Yeah.
people pay attention because you're just like, well, he knows something.
And not just like, oh, he guessed right about Twitter because perceptually Twitter is vapid,
sure,
right? And,
sure. Because he was one of the first ones, right? Like that jumped
totally.
on there,
yeah. So, but like science tech, like he really understands all that. Like
Right.
he is crazy smart.
But
And I think he's a good actor too.
Yeah.
I didn't even grow up watching that 70s
I
show.
never really watched it either. I've seen a couple
it's
episodes.
so
maybe.
interesting
Yeah.
because I watch it all the
same
time.
thing.
Yeah.
I've seen a couple here and there, but I never watched it religiously. I don't know the characters' names or anything, but I've seen a couple in reruns or whatever. But I didn't know him from that, but I knew him more from his movies. Dude, Where's My Car, of course, but the Butterfly Effect.
Oh yeah, sure.
And I think he's a really good actor. I told you that Jobs movie. I
Right,
thought he did
yeah.
a really, really good job playing Steve Jobs.
I have to point out real quickly that past guest friend of the show, Bill Cott, was in Dude, Where's My Car?
He was.
There you go.
He was the security guard in the bubble wrap.
That's right.
So I think he's a really good actor. And yeah, he got kind of typecast into that Dude, Where's My Car comedy thing. That's where the money was being made. And
Sure.
He was good in those comedies. I liked him in those for what they were too. But when he did the dramatic roles, it showed the talent that he had. So I think for a long time he's proven that he can do it. And this is another one where he's really good. I agree. There was that one moment when he gave that speech where he broke and they just left it in. Like he could not stop himself from breaking when he gives that girl the speech about
Oh yeah.
the song and how it's like a window into her soul or whatever.
Right.
It's ridiculous. And BJ Novak wrote it to obviously be like, this character thinks this and it's serious, but it's ridiculous. And like, he just could not say it with a straight face. I'm like, they left that in, and like he plays it up as like I'm choking up because if you're trying to not laugh, sometimes you
Right.
can act like you're sad, like if you're joking
Yeah,
around.
because his
and,
eyes are watering through the whole thing. Yeah.
he cannot say it because it's great. It's great writing. It's hilarious. But like you could tell, Kutcher is having.
He's
they probably
struggling.
did 100 takes of it.
But it's one of those things where you see, they list Ashton Kutcher in the credits, and you're just like, okay, like right on. And then he pops up in this little bit part, and I was like, well, maybe they're buddies. Like
Right.
I don't know the age, like maybe I think there was at one point there was like a really big kind of group of like those early 20s Hollywood kids.
Yeah, and you never know. I mean, BJ Novak and John Krasinski went to high school.
That's what I'm
together.
saying. Like
Yeah.
you have no idea. So I was like, maybe he just did his buddy a favor, but there's a reason Ashton Kutcher is in this movie.
Right.
So he goes and he tells, he's like, she was great, and it just kind of, she died, and that was it. And then Ben goes and talks to the cops.
But he's also caught off guard by like
They're recording.
the recording and that like how sincere this guy is and that he's not a joke. Like he went there expecting this to be really dumb and it wasn't really dumb.
No,
you
like
know?
he like that the gal that he's mentoring. As goofy as that speech is, he's trying to get something out of her,
And he does.
and she gets.
Yeah, that's
she
what I
records
mean,
a ridiculous
like,
track.
The writing is to show that the character actually is genuine and it works. I just mean I don't think Kutcher could say like it's such a ridiculous.
That's
hilarious.
where I disagree. I don't think the character is genuine. I think he's saying whatever he needs to say to get this gal to unlock that one last piece to get that performance. And then, I mean, we know that he's not. When we get to the end of this movie, we know that he wasn't genuine because this girl is being drug out of a tent, like completely unconscious.
I
probably
think you
gonna
can be both.
Yeah,
maybe that's fair.
yeah, maybe potato. I think we're maybe saying the same thing. I just mean
I said tomato. Thank you very much.
He was saying it to. I mean, that's his job, and what he said worked because that's what she needed to hear. I think he's good at what he does as a recording, a producer, right?
Yeah.
And so all I mean is that this speech is supposed to be written semi-comedically because it's like, dude, what is this guy on? It's crazy, but his methods work too. So
he got the performance out of her. That's true.
So we should say too that when the brother comes to Ben with this idea that she was murdered and it needs to be avenged, he sets up that what happens is people go to these parties and they do drugs and drink. They go to this thing called the after party and they don't come back from it. And so he's suspicious and the brother's also blaming it on the cartel.
Yes.
Yeah.
This whole like she doesn't do drugs and so she went to high school. She went to school with this guy who's like the big,
What a great
the big drug pusher.
It could sound like a bad guy's name.
Yeah.
And initially when you meet this guy, who I will say he played Richard Ramirez in one of the American Horror Stories
Oh, okay.
seasons, and he was terrifying. Like he was a really good like Richard.
I gave up
Ramirez.
to the second one.
That I don't blame you.
Yeah.
And this character was hilarious too in the writing of what people expect of you and the appearances you have to keep up and who you really are. There's a lot this movie has to say about these preconceived notions of people, whether it be people in Texas or a certain group of people in Texas. Are these just these yeehaw cowboys? Are these the cartel, quote unquote? And how are they going to act? And so it's really interesting when you let your guard down and you actually start to get to know people, which is kind of the point of this film.
Well, that's exactly what happens here, right? Is he sees this guy like at the club and walks up to him, and he's got this guy's got all his boys around him, and this character puts on a face, and he puts on a front of a badass and like a take no prisoners. I will slit your throat if we do this, blah blah blah. And as soon as Ben says, "I'd like to talk to you about that night," because he says that like Abby, mine was like the last shoulder she fell asleep on or something. Like I was the last one to see her alive, and Ben says, "Let's talk about that. Like I want to talk to you about that last night," and he says, "Let's do it, just you and me. It can't and nobody else." So he goes to like this other, I guess, club. I don't know.
It's like a warehouse.
Yeah, I guess that kind of was.
Cartel ran.
And as soon as Ben and this, I say his name again, Sancholo are alone together, the facade of like this cartel hitman drops.
Right.
And he's like, she was my friend. Like, she taught me how to read. She never gave up on me. Like,
my mom was super Jesus-y and wouldn't let me read Harry Potter, and she would read it over the phone. When they pan her room, you see all the Harry Potter books.
Yeah, right. So I just thought
but
that was
he drops the whole
gimmick.
It's all up front. And so, again, that's like you have these... not only do people have these preconceived notions, but he says that he has to keep up appearances. And he's like, well, this is the way I have to act. I have to let them think that I got her killed. Otherwise, they're going to
want me to really kill somebody.
Yeah, right.
And so I thought it was really interesting.
Like Ben's, he's like, you're on Snopes. That's not true.
He's like, what?
So it's again, the movie's very clever. The way that it's like, here's the way that we present people, and then also the way that people feel the burden of how they have to present themselves to fit into whatever part of society, whatever box that they feel like they're a part of. And so it's saying a lot. There's so much to dissect with this film, which is what makes it interesting, I'm sure, especially on a rewatch.
Yeah, sure. So I think they end up at like a Whataburger, which was kind of a thing that they had talked about before.
That whole thing, that whole conversation about what do you like about Whataburger?
It's everywhere.
It's right there. It's right there.
It's
always
right there. But what if you had a McDonald's and a 7-Eleven and whatever all lined up? They're all right there.
Whataburger.
What would make you go to why?
Do we have any of those
like,
here? Do we have those here?
No,
I didn't think so.
And the brother, I can't remember the exact line, but he's like, Ben, and he just like tries to reason with him. He's like, you can't explain, you can't put into words about the Whataburger. Like the writing again,
very,
BJ
very,
Novak.
very, very good.
So good.
So this is we get a reveal where Grandma is just kind of like, oh yeah, she was a pill popper, she's a drug addict, and BJ Novak's like, I'm sorry, what? And she was like, yeah, the girls told me. And so this entire time, everybody in this family, with the exception of the mom, had been like, she's this precious. And the mom was like that too, but I don't know that she knew the extent of what everybody else knew. She, the girls are like, we told Teddy we wouldn't tell. And I think that's the other guy's name. And of course now BJ Novak is looking at the brother and he's just like, are you kidding me? Like this entire time we're trying to find this murder, but she's a drug addict? And that she died of an overdose? Like, this is exactly what happened.
Well, and this is the people not wanting to accept the truth. That's the other commentary on people. And no matter what walk of life you're in, this is a sister, a daughter, a friend. You don't want to believe that she could possibly overdose. She was a good person for all intents and purposes. She couldn't have done this. Something had to happen to her. It's the lies that we tell ourselves to feel better about something. And so the brother, the way that he says this, and it's heartbreaking too, because he's like, I just knew it had to be something else, and I was hoping that we'd find it along the way because of this X, Y, and Z. But it's heartbreaking, but so true, the way that people can't, it couldn't have been this person.
This.
Or, you know.
Even when the truth is staring you in the face, you kind
Exactly.
of refuse to believe that that's actually what it is.
And we should also mention, too, that when Ben is investigating things before this all drops, he goes to talk to the law enforcement, and we find out a big reveal for the plot and for this mystery is that the bodies where they're dumped are where like 4 different jurisdictions intersect. So all the police agencies are passing it off to the other one. Oh, that's on your term. The Border Patrol, the sheriff.
Do you know this is why Zodiac never got caught?
Is that really what happened?
He would kept bouncing from like county to county in California or in LA. No. Yeah, California in LA. That's where it was. And he would just bounce from county to county and nobody would talk to each other. Like when they start in the book, at least, you know, Graysmith's book is a little flawed at this point, but he says that like the other counties would have a body and it all, you know, the Zodiac would claim it, but they wouldn't talk to each other. So they were just like, that's yours, that's mine. And there was no communication.
Made it hard to investigate.
That's how he kept getting it. He or she kept getting away.
So that's one of the things of why none of these murders are getting solved with all these people that go to the quote unquote after party is that whoever's killing them or leaving them to die brings them to this place. So no one, Border Patrol, Highway Patrol, Sheriff's Office, police, they won't investigate, they won't figure it out, and they all just keep handing it off.
And so this entire time we have Abby's phone, and Ben is constantly trying to figure out. Also, just like, Ben, what are you doing? Like, stop putting in the code. You're going to lock that phone, and you're never going to be able to open it.
If you wait long enough, doesn't it?
It does.
Like,
Yeah.
It does. He tries like twice, and then
right.
leaves it alone. Yeah.
And then he, I guess there was like this little saying that Abby's brother and had with Abby, and realized that Abby had shortened it down to 4 numbers, and of course those numbers are somewhere else, and they put those numbers into the phone, and bam, Abby's phone opens and there's Ben's name, but as
it's not a conversation.
No, and he's scrolling through and he was like, you know, I have you listed on my phone as Ben, who's just a guy I hooked up with in New York. And the
brilliant.
Yeah,
how she flips
she's
it,
like, and my family's obsessed with him. It's so cute.
Right.
Like,
Right.
Brilliant, right? She flipped it. Like, we thought that he's the jerk who's just hooking up with people. Well, she did the exact same thing to him.
Yeah, right. And she's not. Nobody was a jerk. Like, it was a mutual hookup, and it went about their lives.
But we're supposed to feel one-sided, like, oh, you know, he's been guilted into this and whatever. And it's like, no, she thought the exact same way of him. He was nothing to her. The family was really talking about who the real killer is, you know, the person that's in the phone that was under Ben. And so I love that reveal, and I love how he has to then accept that and be like, wait a minute.
We should also, his car blows up, and you can take that as he got too close to something and somebody went, or his Prius blew up.
Yeah.
Well, they explain it. Did you catch it? They did explain it.
They do explain it. When he goes to the after party at the end, 2 guys see him and they're like, you like what we did to your car?
And
because
they admit it,
because he had said that at the rodeo
that
when they said
Texas A&M
that he's a Texas
whatever.
A&M or Texas State,
sure,
yeah, and it was he's supposed to root for Texas Tech, and so they blew up his car over football. Also, I love when the family picks him up from the hospital and they're like, and Ty's like, oh man, can you imagine if that had been a real car?
Yeah, that's a really good. Again, the lines are so subtle, but they're so good.
Yeah,
they're so good.
Yeah, nobody over delivers the jokes. Like
he's being honest. He's like, man, could you imagine? Could you imagine if that was a real car?
Yeah,
man,
gasoline and everything.
Right.
But this movie is doing to us, it's like such a great commentary on the whole true crime phenomenon, everything. We want a murder mystery. We're there with Ben trying to solve this thing that started off as kind of a joke. He treated people as characters and the whole situation is a joke. The premise is let's figure out, let's be entertained by how ridiculous these people are. And then he says, well, maybe it was a murder, and we go on this whole murder mystery.
Right.
And then his car gets blown up and you're like, oh my God, he's getting too close. They blew up his car. And then we find out he rooted for the wrong football team, and these small town people were like, yeah,
blow it up.
Like it's a prank. Blew up his car.
Right. So this whole like relationship between the family and Ben implodes when Ben, you know, kind of lays it out, and he says,
the grandma says, well, she was quite a pill popper though.
Right.
And there's just dead silence, and everybody's like, you're not supposed to say that.
Right.
And then Ben loses it because he's just like, wait, I've been investigating this as a murder because everyone tells me she's this precious little angel.
Right.
No way she could have died from a drug overdose. And it's like, and now I find out that she absolutely could have died from a drug overdose.
And all of you knew it.
And you all knew it.
Right.
And nobody said anything because they wanted to protect her image.
Right.
And meanwhile, this is how innocent people get convicted.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
And his credibility's on the line. This podcast was going to be his big break. And not only did he start to care about these people, but now it's like, this is out there. The podcast is almost done and ready to air, and the ending is basically going to be him looking ridiculous if it's just a drug overdose. And
right.
He's like investigating it as some big thing.
But isn't that kind of the way true crime podcasts go? Like I think of Serial comes to mind, and I think that was a really well done, well crafted podcast up until the end, and the last thing they were just like, oh well,
yeah,
we didn't do anything.
Who knows?
Nothing changed.
Yeah,
I don't know. I mean, I really liked that first season of Serial, but the difference there is that it really was a murder. What I'm saying here in this case, if you're investigating it and making like, oh, it's a murder and there's all these clues and everything, and then it's going to come out or people know that, yeah, she was just a pill popper. It's like, well, then it's a false premise from the start. It's they didn't say like in the end of Serial, oh yeah, he didn't really kill the person, they overdosed. You know what I'm saying? It's a completely different revelation.
Well, I guess the revelation is that he did it, right? Like that to me, that's the thing where I mean, I'm not saying that he did do it, but I'm saying like you do this whole thing, you think that he's innocent, his story is kind of checking out, and then at the end they're just like, nope, he actually did it. They got it right. Like that's how does he end up? Oh, okay. So he unlocks the phone,
right.
sees all the messages
after the fight with the family.
Yeah.
Then he goes back. He figures out how to unlock the phone because at the Whataburger they talk about stealing the table numbers, and he sees she has
1934
1435.
Yeah. Oh, is that what it was?
Yeah.
Okay.
And table numbers in her room, and
right.
he's and the kid El Stupido Mason,
just fantastic.
Yeah, explains the code, and he realizes its significance, and then that
bang, and then there's two texts that's like, I need help, please.
That never sent.
Right.
Yeah.
And then we realize that there is another party like at this spot. So BJ Novak dresses in his finest cowboy gear, brings a weapon with him, which is just bonkers.
Yeah.
And then goes to the party, and he is walking around. And I think we don't really see the conversation between him.
This is another
Ben
great line where he gets Mason to drive him in like his little
this guy's
go-kart.
Go-kart with his helmet or whatever.
And he's talking to his podcast producer, and she's like, "Where are you right now?" And he's like, "I'm in an Uber."
But she's trying to wrap up the show. She's like, "Look, you just had a car blow up. Like I've got all the information I need. I'll finish it." And he's like, "Please don't finish it. Please just give me like a day."
Well, that's the thing is he's a liability for her. She's like,
sure.
It's going to be on my conscience. You get killed down there.
Right.
And she tells him to stop working. Like, it's not a question of like, there's no more time. She's like, you come back, and he's like, okay. Like he needs a day to get back or whatever. But at this point, he is to stop the investigation.
And he's not stopping. So he goes to the party. He has an interaction with Ty, but we're not really sure. At least I don't remember like what was said, or if you even actually hear what was said. But
like, what are you doing here?
I guess that's kind of what
point,
it was, right?
He badmouths the family, like, yeah, they lied or whatever because they care about the sister, and when he blows up, he insults them all and talks about how
right.
all the things they say about small towns and everything, they're true, and really says some mean things.
I do like where she says, bless your heart. And he's like, and I know what that means too.
Bless your heart and bless your heart, bless all your hearts.
All your hearts can go bless themselves.
Yeah. Oh, so good.
So he goes into this tent, and I guess Ashton Kutcher's character pops back up. And at that point, I was like, interesting.
Yeah, he's in two scenes of the movie. One toward the beginning, and then at the end here, and you're like, wait a minute.
Right. So they go back to this tent, and Ben puts it together. He sees
the drugs.
He sees the drugs that the state patrol or whoever that was showed him earlier about, like, just the way the
sticks of ecstasy or something
or whatever it was, and Ashton Kutcher has the same ones, and it's interesting because Kutcher basically lays it out. He's like, yeah, like we gave her the drugs and we did this and blah blah blah, and Kutcher's like, would you want me to redo that? Like, because he knows, because BJ Novak has like two recording devices. He shows him, he turns one off,
but he keeps recording with his phone.
Yeah. and he shows him that now I've got your confession on tape, and Ashton Kutcher's like, yeah, but you've got your take and I've got my take.
Right.
And
this was brilliant, which really sums up the country. This is the state of the country
he's
here.
We'll be on podcast panels and you'll tell them your side, I'll tell them my side.
He's like, he goes, we know how this is going to play out. He's like, you're going to put this out and everybody's going to think I'm a
right.
And
at first.
And he goes, and then people are going to realize that, there's a big difference between letting someone die and killing someone.
Mm-hmm.
And then someone's going to say, why did you go to this town, Ben? You didn't even know this.
You didn't know that girl.
And then it's all going to flip. And,
and he's not wrong.
And he's not wrong.
He's not wrong.
He's like, and he goes, and then each side will, one side will decide who did it. And then the other side will take the other side just to take the other side.
Mm-hmm.
And he's
which is so true. Oh my God.
Especially right now, right?
Side.
Yeah.
It is. I mean, that's why this movie, clearly he's writing it with certain things in mind. And even though this is about a murder/death, he's talking, it's a bigger commentary on the state of the world right now and the way that people choose to argue things just to argue. People disagree just to antagonize and to go against someone because of their politics, their beliefs, their views, and how there's always that other side. No matter how egregious, no matter how ridiculous the situation is, you're going to have defenders on that other side, and the way that people flip things. And so it was like, man, this is where toward the end of the movie, after it ended, I'm like, there is a lot to think about here.
Yeah, big time.
For
and
sure.
then as Ashton Kutcher is talking, all of a sudden there's a shot, and you see a big old wound in Ashton Kutcher's neck, and the camera pans around, and there's Ben with a gun in his hand, and I can't tell if he meant to miss or if
I just don't think he's
no
good.
way.
He's never fired a gun in his life.
That's also what I thought, but then
as a general principle, he does not avenge deaths. That's just not who he is.
That's right. That's right. And he tells you that.
And there's speaking of that, there's another thing I think we should address because we say this all the time. But earlier in the movies, when he's talking to one of the sisters, he's like, "Well, have you ever heard the theory about Chekhov's gun?" Because we talk about this all the time, right?
Sure.
And he's like, but what I love about that is one, the movie does introduce Chekhov's gun and utilizes it.
Pretty brilliant.
But then the sister is instantly like, but Chekhov's plays never have guns. Like it's,
and he goes, I've actually never read one.
Right.
But
which is also circles back around to what Ashton Kutcher says about how society is so like all that's left of society are remnants.
Yeah.
And he's like, you think the people that post pictures of Audrey Hepburn have ever seen an Audrey Hepburn movie?
It's a great point.
And it's,
it's a great point.
How many people post the Mae West quote? And they've never seen a Mae West movie. They probably couldn't even name a Mae West movie.
It's very smart. And I mean, did either of you guys think the Chekhov's gun they introduced was going to pay off?
No.
There's no
I didn't
way.
see it. Like when that bullet. When that gunshot rings out, I was like, "Well, what the hell was that?" I thought Kutcher shot him.
Yeah,
that's initially what I thought. And then when the camera pans around and Kutcher's got that big old wound in his neck, I was like, okay. And then
Ben shoots him again
as he's dying,
just to make sure, and he times it to the fireworks.
That's right.
Yeah,
he shoots him in the head, and then I think he goes out and he talks to Ty again.
You'll hear it, but you see him talking to Ty. Like he's telling Ty basically what happened.
did.
He took care of it,
and then
he avenged her. Yeah.
And then they go to Whataburger.
That's right.
And the cops have a great line where they get a 911 call on a Saturday night. I never thought he was accident prone.
Right.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It pays off
so
the whole
good.
time. The movie says all they do is say everything's an accident, whether it's car accident, this, that, or the other. And the fact is that there's a murder, and we literally know it was a murder. And they say they didn't think he was accident prone.
Didn't think he was accident prone. So Ben wakes up in the house and he sits down. He's getting ready to leave, and the mom is like, "I heard there was a pretty good party last night." He's like, "I have no idea. I wasn't there."
And
she's like, "That's right. You weren't there.
Everybody goes, nobody went."
That's right." And then
he
says, he goes, "But yes, that was a really, really good party." And that's kind of how it ends.
Well, then they have their drive to the airport.
That's true.
She drives to the airport, and she talks about what about regrets?
Yes,
and how you live life with no regrets, and she's like, life is nothing but regrets.
That's all you do is regret.
Is to make them count.
That's right. And that's how this one wraps up. And it's when I saw the trailer for this, I was
and
like,
he deletes his podcast.
No, he deletes the Kutcher part.
I
No,
couldn't
he
tell
deletes
if
the
he
whole
deleted
podcast.
everything
No,
from
no.
the workstation or
No,
just,
because she finished it. Like she,
but
like
it's
like,
in the shared workstation.
Oh.
Yeah, it's shared. He deleted it so this family wouldn't be turned into character. Well, and he's got to cover up the fact that he murdered the guy in the end. He
That's
deletes the whole
that's
project.
why I thought he just deleted everything that he recorded with Ashton Kutcher.
He cleared out the whole project. That's the server where she said the podcast is ready to go, and he cleared it.
That make I thought it was just that interaction with Kutcher.
No, so I mean, he basically again that's the character arc, right? They were jokes, they were characters, and he was basically making fun of these people in a small town and how they think it was a murder when really it was a drug overdose. And then he ends up realizing, like, no, these are real people, and also, you know, this girl had problems, and he doesn't want people criticizing her, you know, because then think about it, these people are going to be jokes and made fun of.
Right.
She's going to be a druggie. Look at all the bad stuff that will come from this podcast airing that was unintentional on his part. He did not set out to do that, but that's what he would have ended up doing, is dragging them all.
That's probably true.
And then the murder thing, obviously, that also has to
That,
be,
you know, that
right.
old chestnut.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So that's how this one. When I saw the trailer for this, I was like, man, this looks super interesting, and this did not fail to deliver.
Yeah.
This is
was
one of my
really
favorites of the year so far.
Yeah.
I thought it was just going to be a comedy.
I wasn't sure. I didn't know.
And it's funny because like I pushed for us to cover
You
this,
did,
and I
you
don't
did.
do that very often. And it timed out well because since Kevin's got COVID this week, we needed something that was on streaming anyway. But we had decided to do this week prior to that.
Right.
But when I saw this movie when it came out a few weeks ago, and was just like blown away.
Yeah.
At how good this was.
Yeah,
and
this is one of those ones that I was happy to pay for.
Sometimes you see a movie and it's so good, and it's like, and it doesn't seem to get the love in the greater world.
I think it's happened to us actually on the show more than once.
And you start to wonder, like, was I wrong? Did something just hit? But it's like, but especially when it's me, you know, I tend to hate almost everything.
That's true.
And
Yeah,
so,
it's hard to get you to
and
like
so
something.
when I like something and it doesn't really click with the rest of the world, I really start to wonder. I'm like, was I just in a really good mood that day? What happened? So I'm glad that you guys had the same reaction to it as I did. That I was like, especially like when I watched it again, and very rarely anymore do I watch a newer movie for a second time.
Yeah.
And it was just as good. And I could see this being a movie if you sat with it. It's gonna have so many like little lines that are quotable, like. The thing that comes to mind, even though it's tonally, obviously, a totally different movie, is the Caddyshack. Caddyshack has so many great little lines that you quote that aren't even necessarily all that funny. It's just when you marinate in a movie like people have with Caddyshack, you find these like little tiny moments that just resonate with you. And I feel like this movie,
that's interesting. That's a good call.
Has a lot of those that if you watch this movie repeatedly, there's going to be these just little throwaway lines that will just take up space in your head.
Yeah,
that
that McDonald's line.
Yeah,
man. Like, it's rare that you'll get me to write down a line, but I was like, that was good.
Yeah.
That I will define it line. I seriously, when I sent that to Tom, I was thinking, like, I'm like, this is maybe like a new line I will quote because it's so freaking hilarious.
Yeah.
But it's like, these are my skills. I'm a writer. This is what I do. So, like, I don't avenge people, but I define these systematic, whatever, you know, Tom quoted it and can do a better job than me, but it was so funny the way that it was succinctly written. And you don't see that in a movie like this. Usually you get some big moment where someone says like the obvious generic type line, and the way that he catered it to his character was great.
But to him, it was that moment.
Yeah,
right.
Yeah,
right,
exactly.
right.
And his, I keep trying to think of the word, like educated, scholarly, whatever. You know, he's a writer and he does
intelligentsia, right? He's an Upper East Side intellectual, right?
An intellectual, exactly. Yeah. He is definitely, because he is like,
and his reactions to all their kind of casual anti-Semitism,
right.
Where he's like, oh yeah, I saw that Liam Neeson movie, the one where he's on the train, and it's funny. Like my first watch, I'm doing the thing where I'm like, oh, what was the name of that movie where he's like on that subway train, and then he's like Schindler's List. I'm like, oh my god, like you look like a lot of the people in that movie.
And clearly in this movie, when you're talking about Liam Neeson, I mean, he's talking about Taken, like trying to get revenge,
right?
And they go to a completely different movie that has nothing
to do with anything.
Yeah. Oh my god,
this was fantastic. Again, it's probably out of theaters at this point, but it is on Vudu. It's on every Apple TV. It's on everything.
Wherever you buy your movies.
Wherever you buy
It's on
them. or
VOD.
rent.
Yeah.
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 Do
And-
yourself a favor. Either buy it. Doesn't matter. Rent it. Buy it. But watch it. Like, this was fantastic.
Yeah.
I feel like this is one of the reasons we do the podcast. Of course, we love to talk about Star Wars and Marvel and the big movies, and we cover all sorts of stuff. But it's these type of movies that don't necessarily get the love they deserve that we hope people will discover. So when we find a gem like this, it's fun to talk about it and think that people will find it because we covered it.
Sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, I totally agree.
This absolutely deserves to be discovered. It's one of the best movies of the year.
Yeah. Easily.
So anyway, that's it for this one. Let's go around the table and everyone can say where to find them.
This is Joe. You can follow me on the Twitter at Joey Butts, BUTTS21.
This is Kevin. Follow me on Twitter at KevinRBrackett.
And this is Tom. You can follow me on Twitter at Roger Kubert or on Facebook at Facebook.com/Tom O'Keefe. You can find the show online at Facebook.com/Real Spoilers. While you're there, like the page, join the group, and of course, don't forget our Patreon, Patreon.com/Real Spoilers. So that's it for this one. Thanks for tuning in. And until next time, Wallace lives in an animal sanctuary.
Get ready for a spoiler. Won't say it twice, cause we already warned you.